Welcome to All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris, and I'm just setting up this roundtable discussion that we had with our good friend of the podcast. That's Corbin Maxey. We've done a couple other roundtables with him, me, Angie, and Corbin. The first one we did was just inviting Corbin on the program way back when, and then we've done a couple programs where we've talked about trophy hunting, and then we've also talked about why zoos and aquarium matters. So Corbin reached out to us. He wanted to do another one. We jumped at the chance. Every time we do these with him, they're a fascinating discussion on a critical topic, and we did this, and it was so timely because just last week in the United States, our administration here is trying to gut and strip special protections for endangered species in the United States. It's made the news around here, and it's causing quite a few waves because, again, it would end protection for wolves across the United States, or potentially could in certain areas. So we had a discussion on wolves and really the hunting of wolves, what that means. And Angie and I, obviously come at this as scientists. We try to come at it with a neutral mind, but I'll be honest, I made my mind up, and you can listen to find out what my opinion is, because I looked at the data, I looked at the facts, and I just made up my mind. I'm like, okay, this is how I feel. But it's a fun discussion we had with him. Again, you want to follow Corbin, please follow him on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, or his Animals to the Max podcast. You can actually go to his website, which is corbinmaxey.com, corbinmaxey.com. Great friend, just a great friend of the podcast. And we're going to be doing more of these with him in the future. It's just, I think it's really important that all of us start coming together, whatever medium we do. Corbin has his podcast, also goes on TV shows, and we're making contacts with others in the industry because I really believe we need to come together and spread our message with one loud voice rather than a bunch of little voices in the darkness. So anyways, wonderful talk. I hope you enjoy it. And here we go. Corbin, Angie, and I discussing wolves and why they're important.
All right, Chris and Angie from the All Creatures podcast. I am so excited to have you both on the show.
Hey, Corbin.
Yeah, it's awesome to be back. We twice a year, 3 times a year, we need to do this. We need to come together and chat.
Yeah, and these are like some of the most popular episodes, our roundtable discussions, because we did trophy hunting on your show. Mm-hmm. We did Why Zoos Matter, and now we're talking about something so controversial. We're talking about wolves. And Angie, can you give us a wolf howl, please? Do it.
Ow! Oh, oh, oh!
This is all they do all day at home.
I think that's where I'll just reinsert some actual audio during.
I haven't warmed up my vocal folds yet. Come on, give me a break.
Okay,
I've been on vacation.
We'll give you guys a break. No, thank you so much. And just before we dive into this, I am such a huge fan of your podcast, and thank you so much because you name drop me all the time, and I literally freak out. Like I'm like, oh my god, they said my name, and it's like it's crazy. So thank you so much. I love your podcast, All Creatures Podcast.
Thanks. And, we always push your podcast, Animals to the Max. And it was funny because we did the 100th episode. When I was putting that together with Angie, I crack up on the zoo one when I'm sitting there going off on this tangent and I'm like, oh, wait, that's it. And then Angie came in and said, oh, that's so lame. And you guys, oh, my God. Anyways, we've had some amazing times together, and I'm really looking forward to many more of these in the future because it's the more we come together, and I know we were briefly talking about this before we recorded, we're all fighting the same fight, and we're all on the same team. So the more we communicate, the more we share ideas, the more we, I got to get Paul Cosmos on from Varmints, another great guy that we need to talk to. And we're all spreading the same message in different ways. So, it's good to come onto your podcast and talk about, wolves today. And then there's going to be another issue in a few months. Hopefully we can tackle together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's just dive into it. I mean, for those of you who don't know, I live in Idaho, like in the Rocky Mountains.
You are in the heart of it.
I am in the heart. I am in the heart of, let's smoke a pack a day and let's, I'm in very anti-wolf territory. Chris, you're in California, Angie, you're in Florida, but yeah, this is so controversial across the nation. So let's just jump into it.
Well, I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about being in the middle of it, because I think after looking through a lot of popular press, and of course, I do have a ton of research, or not a ton, but some cool stuff that I found that people may have not thought of, or some statistics, so people can take those numbers for what they are and digest them. But one thing that really did strike me is being from Michigan originally, the lower half of Michigan, and then now in Florida, I don't live in wolf country. We have coyotes and, of course, deer in different hunting seasons where I reside now, where I used to live. But some of these articles did put me in the shoes of people that live in those states and the farmers. And I think it's just so interesting as far as really trying to put yourself in everybody's shoes. And of course, I want to put out there, and I shouldn't speak for my podcast partner, Chris, but we've been doing this so long, I know I can speak for him. The listener should be forewarned that I am definitely anti-wolf hunting, but I'm open-minded, right? And actually, as more as I read the literature and read some of the studies, it did open my eyes and about the struggle, and it's how complex it is. And I found myself even last night actually putting myself in the poor DNR and Fish and Wildlife's shoes. Mm-hmm. Those guys are in the middle of. They have to appease everybody, right? And I just really felt for them as far as, wow, they have a really tough job. This is really complex. And so, yeah. And for me, I just like to open with thinking more about human-wild conflict. And Chris and I talk about it a lot in the podcast. I know you've talked about it with some of your guests and Animals to the Max. But it is interesting that this is so close to home here, and it's been ongoing for many, many years.
Yeah, and really, really quick, for people who aren't familiar with All Creatures or Chris and Angie, you are both scientists, you are both PhD, so you guys know what you're talking about, and I think the reason why our roundtables have been so popular is that you literally look at the data. You have the data. And
I don't know. I don't know if we know exactly what we're talking about, but we
Wait.
We know how to interpret data. I think I interpret data and also interpret, like some of the biasness that may pull people one way or the other, and that is I have my opinions before I started researching for this podcast, and then reading the data neutrally though, and seeing if I can shift them. And so stay tuned for that on whether how much I've shifted, and for me the bar did shift a little bit, to be completely honest. So stay tuned. Well, not a lot, but a little.
Yeah, and from the scientist perspective, we're trained to be neutral, and when we do research, we go in with a neutral mindset. We should. Doesn't mean it always happens, but we should. When we do our experiments,
statistics people.
Yeah, we look at the data, and then that helps us.
I hated statistics. I'm looking at my degree right now because remember last time we last talked, I lost it, or my mom lost it, and I was like, that class was awful. I mean, dear Lord. Okay, sorry, Chris. Stats.
No, I'm there with you. I took 4 iterations in college. That was enough to make me throw up. No, I'm just saying that, we come with a neutral mindset, but I know Angie said she's open-minded on hunting wolves. I'll tell you what, I'm not. And I want Angie to try to change my mind on this podcast, because I don't think wolves should be hunted in the lower 48 right now. I'm totally 100% against it. I'm going to take a stand this podcast. I'm doing something different. I normally try to stay open-minded. My attitude towards trophy hunting shifted, and that's another podcast for another day, because I can see where it is helping wildlife. In Africa.
What? Okay,
I know.
Hold on. Okay, hold on. Okay, we're gonna. Okay, next podcast, next roundtable, we have to do that. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. I'm just.
Yeah, I think we need to revisit it, and I think we should invite Ivan Carter, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, and with the Cabela Foundation, and this is an anti-hunting.
And for the record, with that, I am not.
And she's on the opposite.
Oh my gosh!
I haven't seen the numbers. I've heard the talk. I haven't seen the numbers. I'm a numbers league. So yes, but wolves. We got to focus on wolves.
Okay. So Chris,
it's interesting. We both come with different ideas, but we do need to look at the data, and the data that I'm looking at today is telling me it is wrong to kill wolves. And I want to add, and I'll sprinkle this throughout the podcast, our interview with Greg Rasmussen that aired, by the time this airs, it aired the previous week, on the painted dogs in Africa. Very similar story than what's going on with the wolves in the lower 48 in the United States. Persecuted, shot, killed, and I'm going to dare say it, and we can talk about it. Hopefully Angie can talk a little bit about this. I dare say wolves have culture, that we're looking.
Absolutely.
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you start looking at behavior, how intelligent they are, family, social structure, that stuff, that's where I think it's immoral, absolutely 100% immoral to go and kill these animals. It's just my opinion today after looking at the data.
Right. Well, and I also believe it's immoral, but looking at the numbers is where that's what I want to talk about today. And we can talk both about morals and about the numbers. I also want the bigger question and or take home message for people is, I don't think it should be, are you for wolf hunting, which I'm not, like I said, but I might be slightly more so than Chris, depending on the numbers, or 100,000% against it like Chris. I don't think that should be the question. Mm-hmm. I think it should be, how can humans and wolves better coexist? Mm-hmm. Is that possible? And what is working for that? And so throughout the podcast, there's some solutions, and people are trying different things. And so that for me would be the long-term goal, as far as trying to coexist and reduce some of this human-wildlife conflict. Because if we think about it as a model, right, this is a predator, apex predator, and then, of course, you have the prey, being the cattle and the sheep, livestock, and people's pets, too, sometimes. If we could figure out how to coexist better with this animal in certain areas, then we could set examples for other countries that had this issue, like you mentioned with the painted dogs. And so that would be my ideal long-term goal, is try to work through some of that stuff and actually take data on what's working, what isn't working, and go from there and set more of an example and try to figure out how to coexist better together.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start from the beginning. Let's start historically. Let's talk about wolves.
Yes.
Let's start from absolutely. Whoever wants to tackle that, but let's just go back in time. What, like 100 years?
Yeah, so I'm the history nerd, so hopefully this isn't lame there, Angie.
No, this history was reading like a page turner. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I know.
What happened the next year? What happened? So you give us the quick synopsis, Chris.
Yeah. Now that's going back to the Zoo Matters podcast. That was pretty funny. But no, it's the wolves have been persecuted for 100 years. I mean, they've been treated as a nuisance species. So they were wiped out in the lower 48. Yeah, except parts of Michigan, I think or Minnesota. It was very, very small population Minnesota, but completely wiped out. If we're looking at Yellowstone, because I think that's really the hotbed right now, we're near you, Corbin, into Idaho and Wyoming, Montana area, Washington State, that in Yellowstone, they were eradicated in the 1920s, so it'd been 70 years since they were wiped out. And I think for people listening, this story about wolves is not just about human-wildlife conflict. I think it's critical to understand exactly how predators benefit an ecosystem. That's the message I wanted to paint today, talking about how Yellowstone has changed dramatically in the last 20 years due to wolves being reintroduced. And it's all good stuff, good news. So wolves, were shot and killed and poisoned, their dens blown up with dynamite. It just horrifically persecuted in the 48 because they killed cattle and people were scared of them. Basically, people were just really scared of them. And they didn't come back until the Endangered Species Act was engaged in the 1970s. Now, I have the history of that if you're interested.
Heck yeah, hit us.
All right. So I know this was, kind of the thing I was going to talk about a lot today too is how the Endangered Species Act, this current administration is trying to gut, and they're trying to gut it in the interests of forestry, mining, and oil and gas development. Those are the lobbyists that are pushing to get the Endangered Species Act gutted and these protections ripped away for all these animals, which anybody that listens to our podcast, both of ours, knows that we're 100% against that because, not just globally are we seeing a catastrophic effect of what's going on around the world with wildlife in the oceans and on land. Here in our backyard in the United States, same thing's happening. And this is a wonderful case study to look at it. So the Endangered Species Act was passed by a quote-unquote Republican president, Richard Nixon, and he's the one that in 1972 said, hey, we need to protect our wildlands and our wildlife. He led the effort. So you got one of the good things that he did do was get the Endangered Species Act. And so Congress passed it in 1973 and basically said that we have a rich natural heritage, aesthetic, ecological, educational, recreational, and scientific value to our nation and its people is critically important. So they passed this law to protect all these species, which now wolves are part of that, right? So when wolves had those protections or added to the Endangered Species Act, they started to come back, right? And now they're up to, what's the population now, around 5,000 in the lower 48?
Well, Chris, they were actually reintroduced, though, to Yellowstone in central Idaho.
Mm-hmm,
so they brought some of the Canadian populations down, and that's how they've basically and then they did it in multiple phases. It wasn't just like one group, but in 1995-96 they brought 31 gray wolves from Western Canada and relocated them to Yellowstone, and then 97 they translocated 10 wolves from northwestern Montana to Yellowstone. And so doing some of this shifting and moving of managing these populations to try to help bring them back up. They didn't just.
Oh, go ahead.
But they were able to do that because they knew that once they brought them, well, Yellowstone is obviously federally protected, but that the numbers could then recover, or see if they would recover. Which of course, the population grew, and that's where it's always wonky as far as, well, what is a viable population, and that's something also too I think is worth discussing. And I don't think there is a right answer. Mm-hmm. And especially when you're talking about an animal that historically, before the 1900s, before we wiped them out, as Chris said, because of moving westward and fear and basically wanting them taking livestock, they were from Canada, Alaska, Canada, all the way down into Mexico, all the way east, I believe, as far as Maine.
Wow.
And so, I mean, they were everywhere. They did really great before we came here. And so they theoretically, if left alone, they would do great. And so it does blow me away that with the Endangered Species Act, we brought them from Canada, relocated them to Yellowstone. They did good, or I guess too good, some populations. And that started basically this fight, for lack of better terms, between advocates and then, of course, pro hunting, pro culling, because of the they call it depredation, but basically the eating of their livestock, killing the livestock, which I have numbers about that too, because it's not, it's pretty low.
I mean, I just have had, I've had a couple wolf experts on the show. And actually had a gal from Maggie Howell, who has the best name for a wolf conservation organization. Howell.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's her legit
That's
last
amazing.
name is Maggie Howell.
That's not like a stage name or
No,
anything?
and I've known Maggie
awesome.
way before social media. She's the director of the Wolf Conservation Center, and which has a huge
Love that
presence.
place.
Right? So Maggie
Yes.
Howell, she's a super
Yes.
nice gal. But she squashed this rumor, and I just want to say, because we talked about these Canadian wolves, can we squash a rumor, because so many people think that the Canadian wolf is a separate species that is 200 pounds and they are
more
giant,
aggressive, I read?
more aggressive.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that, because that's what a lot of people are. Yeah, just really quick.
No, that's good, and it's so
I mean, Canadians are way nicer. That's actually
The Canadian wolves.
that is truth. That is not a myth.
Well, let me. Here's a great article came out 2 days ago. It was an opinion piece in the Seattle Times, and I think this highlights exactly what the issue is today, in my opinion. Unless Angie found some more data, or Corbin, you've run across some different stuff. It was an opinion piece talking about how these wolves were being killed in Washington State. Now, nobody can just go out and hunt wolves right now. Wolves are still protected by the EPA. And I do want to go back and say...
You mean in Washington?
Yeah, Washington State.
Washington State. Yes, and I think our listeners, maybe before you go into the story, right now, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, basically the fights then went back and forth to court as far as in some places would try to get the wolves delisted on certain states like Idaho or Montana.
Wyoming.
And then advocates would come in and they would get delisted temporarily on one judge. And then advocates would come in and sue and get them relisted. It was literally, I mean, it's like relisted, delisted, relisted, delisted. I mean, just back, kind of this back and forth battle of taking a little bit of language of the Endangered Species Act, and I'm no lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but taking some little wording and running with that and saying, well, no, and you have to look at the wolf population as a total, not just these subcategories and these individual populations per state, and so it's just been back and forth, a lot of litigation. And I tried to find numbers on how much money it cost a lot of money to, of course, relocate these wolves because they did it very scientifically and gradually and to make sure that the population was healthy. But since then, I would be very interested to know how much the litigation has cost to kind of do this battle back and forth as far as making sure they either stay listed or then the other group's trying to delist them. It's just, to me, it's very incredible, and it just goes to show what lobbyists, how much money they're willing to put into something, and then how many people are fighting for the wolves, like how much money advocates are putting in for them. I mean, they're obviously a very, very loved animal. They're one of my favorite animals, and so as it stands, currently gray wolves are delisted in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, and so they can be hunted in Idaho and Montana under state hunting regulations. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't. Chris looking at me like,
Corbin, you live there. Are you out there hunting wolves?
No, yeah, no.
Well,
Yes, that in Idaho they do give out, to my, wolf tags and.
Okay. Right. It's very controlled. It's
but
not a lot, but
I'll tell you what, and I'm actually happy that you brought this up because, of course I have my own animals at home. I have several snakes, and for substrate, you guys are probably like, where is he taking this? Where is he taking this?
I'm on board, baby. Choo-choo. I want to hear this.
Get on board, Angie. It's about time. And so, anyway, I use newspaper for the snake, for, our large pythons, for just substrate, because it's just, you have, 11, 12 snakes. It's
I've rolled up a lot of snake newspaper after they took one of their enormously not smelling well defecations.
See? Right? So I was in there cleaning the other day, and we get, tons of newspapers from our local market. They just donate a bunch of stuff to us, just old newspapers. And sure enough, I found an old newspaper in front page of this lady holding this bloody wolf that she shot, holding it up and smiling. The front page of our Statesman's here, or our Idaho Statesman. It was so disgusting. I just couldn't even. It took me like a second. I was like, "Oh my God!" Like how barbaric. I mean, just holding it up, and of course the camera's angled to make it look just like this monster.
So big, yeah.
Anyway, I was so happy that one of the snakes took like an enormous crap on that a few days later, which it's where it should be. But yes,
exactly.
To answer,
I'm right there with you.
With
you.
Idaho,
and so that's right. They're trying to get. I believe it's currently being litigated to try to get them delisted. Like basically, I would say the goal of people that are either pro hunting or pro wolf reduction programs want to, instead of the federal government being in charge of them through the Endangered Species Acts, want each state to individually mandate how they care for them, or not care is not the right word, but what they do with their population and how they control them. And so I think currently there's about 6,000 wolves throughout like 9 different locations. Right. As Chris mentioned earlier, of course, in the Rockies, but then over in Michigan. California, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so
Northern California, yeah.
So that's kind of the battle, and as Chris mentioned too, then this administration they just want, of course, gut everything, and so that's, of course, adding on the pressure to these different state agencies, and then of course the advocates are hopefully fighting back, and I think they are.
And Angie, you made a good point, and we say this in our podcast quite a bit. When it's not about the money, it's about the money.
It's always about the money.
Who's fighting to deregulate this? Not just trophy hunters or somebody that wants to go hunt, or a poor, people that raise livestock. They're not rich by any stretch. Most of them are very poor. It's a very tight business financially. Most of them.
Like one cow does matter. One sheep does matter.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, and I give that to the ranchers. But who's fighting this, right? What lobbyists? Why? That's the big question. Why are they fighting this? And it's not just when you look at the Endangered Species Act, it's not just gray wolves. Sage grouse, this burrowing beetle they want to get delisted because it's on a bunch of oil lands and stuff in Wyoming. I mean, they are fighting hard to gut the EPA, the EPA, but also the Endangered Species Act, because they want to drill. They want to go and make money, and that's all they care about. And that's why, whenever we point the finger, and our audience is about 60% from the U.S. and then 40% globally, and in the United States, we tend to like to point the finger to Africa or Asia and say, clean up your mess. You're messing up the environment. You're killing tigers. You're killing elephants and rhinos and pangolins and orangutans and, cat ball langur. You're the problem. Well, let's look in our own backyard. And let's clean up our own mess first.
That's what I'm saying. I feel like if we could figure out this hairy mess, it would be a great success example to figure out how to coexist, and obviously for the animals' welfare and for the actual farmer's pocketbook. Because I come from a long line of farmers and hunters, and I don't farm or hunt. Obviously, I chose a different career path, but they are some of the biggest conservationists. I mean, they like land. They need, they especially hunters, they want animals so they can hunt them. And whether you agree with that or disagree with that, that's, of course, we're not going to change that necessarily. And farmers too. Farmers care a lot about the land that they either farm animals on, or their fruit, or their vegetables. So they're stewards of the land as well. And that's where I feel that we could work together, because there is this common bond, and but what's probably helping throw a wrench in this or pitting us against each other is, as Chris pointed out, some of the lobbyists that take one thing and just run with it, and that's kind of how this basically our whole country is right now. You're either one way or the other, and you watch one news outlet or the other, and things like that. So it's. I know that definitely theoretically most farmers don't like wolves killing their livestock, but in the same instance, I don't know if a farmer would actually go to Capitol Hill to fight. It's
Well, let me throw this in. Let me throw this in here, and Corbin, please jump in.
I'm
like, and I'm bouncing back, throw the ball back and forth.
This is why I love these roundtables. No, I'm soaking it all in.
All right, so here's this article that just came out 2 days ago that I was talking about, Seattle Times.
Oh yeah, Washington State. Okay.
Single rancher, one rancher grazing on public lands. Okay, so what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of cattle, or not a lot of cattle, in the West, they like to graze on public lands, and they're allowed to, and it costs them about $1.35 per month per cow calf, right? Dirt cheap for them to go out and graze on public lands, and it costs us as a taxpayer about $120 million per year. Okay, so there's some hard numbers on supporting these ranchers who honestly do not make a lot of money. Most of them scratch out, eke out a living. Okay, my uncle did it. My family's, like Angie said, came from ranchers. I have a deep ag background, did research in cattle and cows until I switched to endangered species, blah, blah, blah. Okay, one rancher who's grazing on public lands in the Colville National Forest in Washington State is responsible for having 20 wolves culled or killed, because since 2012, they've attacked his cattle, have killed some cows or calves, and so the national, not the Forest Service, the Fish and Wildlife had to go out and cull 20 wolves, including a pack leader. Okay, plus young wolves, other ones, and it's been different packs. This isn't the same wolf pack coming in. As one's killed off or driven off, another one comes in, and they keep coming into this lands because it's optimum wolf territory. So there's one rancher. 20 wolves have been killed because of this one rancher's decision to graze his cattle there. And in this article, they're arguing, why don't we just move the rancher and his cattle to a different area?
Yeah.
And let them be, and this is just a small microcosm of what's going on out in the west of the United States. And I feel for this one rancher who's losing money, but on the other hand, we're going to get into hopefully we get into the Yellowstone, the benefits of wolves, things like that. Here you have a key species, part of the food web, part of the ecological balance of that area. And because this one person is stubborn or whatever and won't move his cows, you're wiping out a species in an area that needs them. So this is where I like my not just heartstrings, but, thinking and really giving this a lot of thought. We have to change. I'm sorry, this rancher has to change. These people need to change their mindset. We need to learn how to live in balance with nature, or there's not going to be anything left. Like it's getting to a tipping point, really.
Well, and looking at the numbers, how much livestock do you think wolves consume?
Great.
I mean,
yeah.
their natural prey is going to be deer, elk, things like that. Okay. So, but they do take cattle, they do take sheep. What do we think on a percent basis?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, I believe that we lose more livestock to disease and more deer and elk to like road collisions from us than wolf fatalities combined.
Oh, 1,000 times more. Yeah.
So it's less than 1%.
No. One?
Less than 1%.
Of wolf livestock of livestock fatalities due to wolves is less than 1%.
And the lower for 48 is what some of the numbers are showing. And so to put that in more perspective, and so in Idaho, from July 2017 for a year, so July 2018, there were 113 wolf kills that were confirmed. Now, this is overall for all the cattle in Idaho, which I don't have that number, but it's
a lot.
The ranching industry. It's a $2 billion industry, okay, and it makes up 20% of your state economy. So 113 wolf kills. Now, they usually often, it may not be a wolf, it could be a bear. So that's the thing. Sometimes they're lumped together. So those statistics, it may even be lower than that, if you will. But they just assume it's a wolf. So, I mean, I guess, and I know that each cow or each sheep is very important to a farmer. I studied a lot of ag stuff as well as Chris did. But that's where I just don't think that that's a very high number, in my opinion.
No, it's less than 1%.
To take out, right, to take out however many, 20, 30, I don't know how many permits they're allowing for wolf hunting in the state of Idaho, but, I would have to presume it's 20, 30, 40, something. I don't know the number, but it doesn't quite equate. And, and so that's what I find really interesting, and that there just couldn't be a simpler solution. Maybe like people have talked about in other countries, and I think in Minnesota they tried it. I don't know how it worked, but in Minnesota they are paying for if you're a farmer and a wolf kills your livestock, we will reimburse you.
Yeah.
So that would be a solution, theoretically, in my opinion, as far as, some kind of reimbursement program or subsidy, right? There's a lot of different farmers, corn farmers, wheat farmers, things like that, soybean farmers that get subsidized from the federal government. So I would have no problem giving ranchers that if they were losing animals and on the account versus like hunting them. So it's just not they don't prefer they don't prefer cattle. So
no, and just to jump in there, Greg Rasmussen, when he was doing his work in Zimbabwe with the African painted dogs, it's very similar. Less than 1% of the cattle or livestock were being killed by painted dogs, but they were targeted, persecuted, and almost wiped out, nearly wiped out to extinction, down to 200 animals in Zimbabwe. And now he's got them through his efforts the last 30 years. They're up to 900 to 1,000 just in Zimbabwe, educating people. The reimbursement model works around the world. We know, like in, say, Nepal with snow leopards, other animals throughout the world that they help reimburse the populace. And I really would love to pick Angie's brain on some of the behavior, and I don't know if it's a good time to jump this study in or not, talking about the benefits of tigers in India.
Heck yeah, let's talk for tourism. Is that where you're going to lead on to?
Well, no. So if Angie remembers this study I brought up in our tiger episode, I think it was in Tigers Part 2, because they're an amazing animal and they're in dire straits throughout the world. So there's a study out of India, or it was Bhutan, actually. So there we go. We just talking this week. And the study looked at the benefits of tigers to farmers. So this is something Angie's talking about farmers, and I'm listening and I'm thinking of this study. So tigers were demonized. They were taking livestock. They were the enemy number one. So they drove them out, right? Well, when they did that, smaller predators would come in and pick off livestock. So the dhole, right, the wild dogs there, and then leopards would come in and prey on livestock. Well, when they brought the tigers back in, that pushed in the areas, that pushed the dhole and leopards way out deeper into.
They were like, I'm out. I'll go back up the mountain. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
right.
Blame them.
But the benefit was tigers rarely took a cow or some other livestock, and the dholes and the leopards went to areas where there was farms, growing crops. And that benefit was it drove out herbivores.
Oh.
So where I'm going with this is, wolves, may pick off a cow every now and then or a calf every now and then, but they are keeping herbivores in check. They are keeping elk populations in check, deer populations in check, which may in turn be out grazing on some other farmer's land that is causing them an economic loss, right? So why are we, highlighting cattle as, oh my God, we're going to not have any steaks for dinner, which I think we need to eat less meat anyways.
That's definitely proven. Yeah.
Why are they the front of it? I mean, even this quote just really, I wish I was still in academia and I could talk to these people, but the National Cattlemen's Board, let me pull this quote up, and they are ones behind the delisting. They said it's about time that let me see right here. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association, this is a New York Times article that came out in June this year, applauded the plan for delisting and said it should have happened sooner. And in a joint statement, Jennifer Houston, president of the group, and Bob Skinner, president of the Public Lands Council, contend that the Endangered Species Act rarely functions as Congress intends. So they're the ones fighting. This is ridiculous. I'm like, why are you pushing for delisting of species? Just to. Anyways, like I said, I'm 100% against killing wolves right now. I'm 100% against it.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, you brought up some really good points as far as if there are other apex carnivores around, they might scare off the smaller ones. And so I wanted to ask the question, though, because it's so prevalent here, and I don't know if it's our cult, it's probably a cultural thing, but is it really effective to hunt them? Does that really basically reduce the cattle kills? So you're going out, you've got this problem, you get your permit, you take out 20 wolves. Did that fix that guy's problem in the state of Washington?
Nope, it just increased.
Yes, in a study, interesting, fascinating. This like blew me out of the water. I'm like, holy, put your seatbelt on, folks. But yeah, a study, I think it was out of 2014 out of PLOS ONE, showed, or is starting to look at, one of the first ones to report, that actually taking out the more wolves you hunt or kill, the more livestock predation increases. And it doesn't make any sense, right? That's logic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you get rid of wolves, and then that less than 1% should go down even further. But they saw an increase of 5%. I think it was 5% one year, and then 6% after taking these wolves out. And so, of course, scientists, well, why? And they're trying to figure out why, and they don't know the answer. And so it needs to be investigated further and in other populations.
Well, Angie, that's just to butt in, just because I was reading research and an author that covered this, and it's because when you take out the alpha, or I guess they're trying to switch away from alpha, but those main, those leaders of the pack, then you're going to get, ones that are without, their social families and, structures, and wolves are social creatures and they're lost, and you get these young ones picking off the easiest food. And I'll tell you what, a chicken in a farm would be a lot easier than trying to run down a deer, by yourself. And if you don't have a pack, livestock would be a lot easier to take down, and then they become problem animals. So that's from what I've heard.
That's exactly what the researchers hypothesize, right? That you take out, especially if you take out one of the dominant animals, or the leaders of the family, that they have to disperse out, and then they start basically creating more little sub packs that don't maybe have that don't have as much experience, or things like that, or the older figures to keep them in check. So and that's why I love science, because it's like, wow, like if your ultimate goal is really to reduce livestock kills, that hunting them may not be the best solution. That may not actually get you what you want.
Nope.
But I came across another fascinating article, and this is out of Conservation Biology. It's a little bit dated. It's 2003 or 4, but they did more of like a survey type thing, and it was out of Wisconsin, and they talked to people there about this whole payment system. Like, well, if a wolf takes one of your livestock, we'll give you compensation for it. And so after this program, I guess, was running for a little bit, they talked to the people, and even though the farmers would receive a compensation for any loss, it still didn't change their mind about wolves basically being bad and wanting them to be hunted.
Yeah. And
it goes on what I think one of you guys mentioned earlier about this deep-seated either fear or, I don't know, machismo dominance, or wanting, like you said, the woman that had the picture of the big wolf and holding it out type. And so I don't, and obviously we know we're America, we love guns and things like that. So I don't know if it's something to do with that, but I just thought that was super fascinating. And that's just in this little population in Wisconsin. I don't want to speak, and that's probably not everybody in Wisconsin. That's probably not, obviously, everybody that's affected by wolf predation, either from their pet perspective or from a livestock. But that's just goes to show me of how deep-seated some of these, of how much we would really have to change. Like, it's easy to say, like, let's not hunt wolves, but and that's one of the things that helped, I suppose, change my, not change my mind, but that shifted me a little bit of like, holy cow, this is super complex.
No,
I mean, it's super complex, and it's super, and it's probably some cultural things going on. It is. It is a deep-seated fear of
popular culture for how many years,
Well, and also too, to speak for those from a hunting perspective of not necessarily people that want to hunt wolves, but from people that are interested in hunting elk and other large hoof stock, which breaks my little heart too. I don't like that either. And like I said, I wouldn't choose to do that. But I think there's also some concern that, well, the more wolves there are, the less elk there'll be.
And let me jump in, because another study that was just published, I think out of Oregon State, looked at elk populations and what was reducing them the most, and it was actually cougars, not wolves. People
Right,
thought wolves.
Really?
Mhm.
It was cougars that actually prey more on elk than wolves.
Yeah, that's what
So-
I learned. I learned that, through all this
I did not
research,
know
is
that.
that
Okay.
of course, wolves do help control the elk population more so when they're not there, and that's what Chris will jump into when he gets to the ecosystem recovery stuff. That's pretty gnarly. But yeah, it's not. It's not as dramatic, I suppose, as you would think. And they're not the only ones taking the elk. And but perhaps from a hunter's perspective, or some of these towns in Montana, I guess, were having some of these elk hunting festival kind of sort of deals. It would bring in a lot of money.
Right.
And so they want the elk populations to come roaring back the way they were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? 90s. So, I can kind of see it from their point of view, but the numbers don't really support, as Chris mentioned, that the elk numbers are being completely depleted.
Okay, so really quick,
And definitely
though,
not by
we need to get everyone's stance on hunting, game like deer and elk. For me,
Sure.
and I've said this publicly, I'm not against it. I personally don't hunt, but I think if it's done sustainably, and I believe I believe it's healthier than a lot of the factory farm, animals, and those animals live a better life. And if you're able to feed your family and you're eating it, I totally get it. I don't do it, but I'm not anti. Where do both of you stand? Because we have hunters probably listening to this thinking, man, these three are just complete tree huggers. I'm just going to turn this crap off.
So my answer is super easy. Corbin, I am exactly the same.
Oh,
So
wow.
I grew up eating venison chili from my grandpa, and so yes, and in Michigan we have a very huge deer population, and it's unhealthy at some points, not only for what they forage on, but just for their own selves from like contagious diseases and things like that. And so, definitely, I'm definitely not anti-hunting, but I'm all about populations, and I'm all about very rigid control over it and population monitoring. Should something happen to whitetail deer in Michigan and their numbers plummeted, then I think there should be some time where we don't hunt them. So it sounds like we're on the same page with that.
Yeah, and I personally don't hunt. I've had venison before, venison steak, sausage, everything. I very similar to what both of you are saying. I think the reason we need hunting of non-predators is because we've knocked out the predator population. So there is no control in place except us. We're the top predator now. I've knock on wood, I've ran over, a deer hit my car, or I hit the deer way back in Texas, and when I was in grad school. I mean, the population needs to be controlled because we've taken out the predators. So and from that standpoint, yes, trophy hunting. Definitely, we need to revisit that one.
Please.
My attitude about it is evolving. I think, where we did a year ago, I was 100% against it because the data didn't show me where it was benefiting conservation. Now I'm learning of places where it actually is benefiting conservation. So Angie and I go back and forth. We've been talking about this for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
It's.
I think
and
it's
we'll
crap.
revisit it.
I think
We'll
it's
revisit
crap,
it.
Chris. I'm kidding. I think it's crap, Chris.
We're gonna have to bring some serious numbers.
Yeah.
I agree
Okay.
with you.
Okay. We will.
But that's why we try to keep an open mind. And so,
and I'm evolving. I'm evolving because
But Chris, I guess I hadn't really thought about I'm obviously anti predator hunting. I don't support it. I don't, encourage it. But that's kind of my question, though, and I'm not an ecologist or anything like that. But what is a good number? Like, could we ever get to a point like coyotes? Coyotes, now they're not a top predator, but they are definitely a predator, and boy, they seem to be doing okay, and they're hunted in a lot of different states, and in of course a very small window. I wouldn't do it. I don't like it for me. But I also, so I guess my dream would be if the wolf population could do that. Then maybe it would be okay from that, because that's I guess it's hard to. So why is it okay to hunt?
I don't.
It's not. I don't like it, and I wouldn't do it. I think there's many other ways to control coyotes potentially.
Yeah.
But so that's. I don't think 6,000 total wolves in the lower 48 is enough to start hunting them anywhere.
I agree with you. That's why I'm 100% against it now.
But I also don't know enough about the data to know how many wolves
are sustainable.
And what has been shown in a couple states where they were delisted, whether it was temporarily while stuff was in court, and then they got relisted. Like I said, it's a individual. It could be it could be one of those documentaries, like those miniseries, as far as like what's going on. But what they showed is that when they were delisted, obviously the numbers increased. But even with the moderate amount of hunting that they did, or culling, sometimes it's not all hunters. Mind you, folks, there are federal programs where they fly helicopters.
Oh, it's really sweet. Yeah, they find the packs,
and they take them out.
And
Okay, so that's not your. It's not my grandpa hunting. That's like a that's so. Anyways, but the numbers still did okay. They still were whatever. Yeah, I don't know if, like I said, I'm not looking at the data right in front of me because I'm on slide 17 and I don't know what number this is on. I've got like 25. No, but. It was, whatever. They started out with a population of 400. They allowed open season hunting for a couple, for a certain tag number for a certain amount of years. And when they look back at the population, it was still like right around whatever. Not exactly where it had started. But,
well, I think one of the things we should talk about because I have the data on Yellowstone, and I think that is my capstone on this whole podcast, why we shouldn't hunt wolves. Right. But let's look at from the moral standpoint and from the animal science side, or the animal behavior or wildlife side, as far as when you go start shooting wolves, how that affects. Let's talk about their culture. Dare we say culture? And
yes,
we talk about that in orcas part 2, another species we covered, and Angie and I introduced that because they're just so complex social behaviors and family groups, right? So listening to Greg talk about painted dogs, and he tells this beautiful story at the beginning of the podcast about Circus and Olna. Circus was the pack leader. Olna was his brother, was a subordinate in the pack. The pack got into a scrap with a bunch of lions. And Greg pulled up in the morning. Olna looked half dead. Called out a vet. Make the story short as I can. Called out a vet. Vet said that there's nothing I can do for that dog. That dog's dead. And Greg's like, there's only 200 of these things left. Can't we do anything about this? No. So they don't do anything. So night comes. Greg goes the next day. Sees drag marks. Figured hyenas got him. Hyenas got Olna. So later, he tells the story. He's out. And he noticed Circus kept going to this one part of the den or whatever. Comes to find out, it was Olna. They had dragged him back to the den, and for 3 months fed Olna. Would bring food back and drop it at his feet. And then after 3 months, Olna got back up and joined the pack. That story alone sends chills down my back about how these animals behave, their intelligence, and their social structure. Then he describes, and this is very similar to wolves. Wolves are very similar. We haven't covered gray wolves yet. We covered red wolves, but we will cover gray wolves here soon. Very similar. You said alpha, getting away from that, but the alphas, the top male, top female, they're not brutal in their family structure. That's not how they maintain their top status. They just are. They're the most intelligent, the healthiest, the biggest, and they just are. The whole pack looks up to them, for leadership. So when you go and start hunting these animals and you take out that alpha, or either the female or the male, you just decimated that family. And by the way, not only talking, those are the only two breeding pair. The rest of them don't breed. So when you're talking about recovery of a species and you're taking out the top painted dog or the top wolf, you just decimated that family. And like you said, then the younger ones take over. They don't understand.
Okay, Chris, you win. You definitely win. I mean, and well, let's think about how wolves. There's theories out there that wolves domesticated themselves. That's how smart they are. They're like, hey, I think I want to come live with you people. You got some nice garbage and some nice food. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, hands down, they're incredibly intelligent. And I mean, I think I definitely agree with that. There, I just it's I don't just so. It seems so clear to me, but I don't know how I even with education about culture and things like that, I don't know how we're going to change a lot of people's minds.
You know what I don't get though? A lot of these hunters or whatever who are going out and trying to get these tags, I would bet my bottom dollar 80-90% of them have their own dogs at home. So
I know,
and we're so passionate about pets in our society, especially in the U.S. We spend billions of dollars on our pets every year. Yeah, and just I just can't even. It blows my mind that we're able to separate that.
They use dogs to
hunt foxes or hunt wolves. Yeah,
they use dogs to.
For the wolves too. I didn't know they use dogs to hunt the wolves.
Yeah, not everybody, but I think, or maybe not for them, but I know there were some statistics about wolves killing hunting dogs. So I don't know if it's they're using them as hunting dogs or if it's just they're hunting dogs on their property for quail hunting. I'm not sure, but those are obviously very important animals, expensive animals, things like that. So
yeah, for me,
I feel you. It doesn't register with me either at all. Go ahead. That's some of the psychology, and that's why I'm pushing coexistence. I mean, obviously you guys are pushing coexistence too, and I don't know, exactly, obviously, or what that looks like, but I just don't know. We're gonna have to come together somehow, and I guess because all this money going in to litigation. And this is just my own opinion. Of course, I'm on my high horse for a second. I am very appreciative for what all the wolf advocate groups have done to kind of fight the delisting, as Chris mentioned, and now especially because of our current administration, thou who shall not be named. But gosh, golly gee darn it, what if all that money could actually be used on species conservation instead of like litigation and that kind of thing, and that's where it's like we're all of us conservationists are like fighting, or not fighting, but it's like we all want the same things. And gosh, if the money could just be actually, better either grouped or managed to instead of, some of these litigation battles, it's important, and thank God they're doing it. Right. But in the same instance, it just is like, wow, that's crazy, man. And I guess not just to throw this out there, I've got to give my BFF, my black-footed ferret plug. What about these other critically endangered animals? Like, I mean, that's a lot of. That's a lot of money that could be going to, in Black-footed ferrets, the restoration program that's happening with the federal government out in Colorado. I mean, it's incredible. They're doing great, but they need more help too.
Yeah.
So shoot, I guess some of this back and forth to me seems like somewhat of a, I don't, it's not a waste of money. I just feel like resources could be used so much better.
It's a waste of money.
And for me,
it's a waste of money. I'll say
if that meant allowing, 10 tags per season, so we don't have to fight about this anymore. I'm not saying that's the answer, because I want to know what a sustainable population is, and I'd want the postdoc job to figure out what happens with the dynamic. I mean, if you do take out an alpha or a female, can they recover? What happens to their culture? I would want to know all of those answers, because Chris brought up some amazing points. But in the same instance, wolves are incredibly intelligent. So, maybe they could survive it. And if maybe that would have to, if that was a way to coexist, or to help some other funds go to some other animals that critically need it. I don't know.
I don't think you're ever going to make everyone happy with a common ground. I really don't.
Correct.
Even if you give 10 tags out or this or that, you'll never make, anyway, that's just what I feel, but.
No, I mean, and I think that I agree. I mean, after reading this data and seeing, and like I said, at one point in time, I even put myself on in some of these state agencies' shoes. I'm like, gosh, they must not have, because they all loved animals when they got in the job, whether you're DNR or Fish and Wildlife. You're obviously an animal lover, you're a science lover. Man, I'm like, geez, that is not, they are getting the short end of the stick, man. That does not seem like a fun place to be right now. And of course, it would be great too to interview some experts there, some of the wildlife biologists that actually study these things. But I do think there's some solutions, and it's been talked about having them perhaps be managed by the state level. I don't know if that's appropriate or not. I because they cross state lines, and every state
so messy.
States are so messy to begin with, depending on if you live in obviously it's much different regulation if you live in California versus Texas. And so there are some solutions that have been tried and or talked about. And I think a lot of them have been somewhat based around science, and that's there. But of course, funding has been cut there as well. So it's not a great time in science if you're a scientist. But I love science-based solutions. And so I think a big key, no matter what, is to keep monitoring their populations and trying to understand their dynamics and their movement, their behavior, and what their numbers look like and how they grow, whether they're left alone. And obviously, oh my God, of course they're federally regulated if I think in any state, or they're state regulated if they are in any place where they are doing these hunting things. But there should hands down be monetary aid, whether that's federal or state. Once again, that's how, Corbin, as you mentioned, it's so messy. If it goes state by state, it's just So I like the idea of a federal mandate for ranchers who lose livestock, period. And maybe even, I don't know what the Wisconsin study was giving them. Maybe you double it. Or maybe you triple it, and then maybe they'll be happy about it, right?
You're gonna have all those. You're gonna have all those cheese-loving people after you, the governments and everything.
Exactly, and so, I think that those are some immediate things that we can do to help with this. To help understand if that make the farmers feel better and get some money for it, and then also learn more about them and see what the numbers are and see what they're really doing. And some solution, there's other more, modern solutions that they actually tried. I think it's in Idaho. Yeah. And so sheep, of course, is an issue too. So we've talked a lot about cattle, but they do sometimes take sheep. And so there is a sheep farmer out of Idaho that has 30,000 sheep. That's a lot of sheep.
Wow.
But they've been working on, actually, I don't know if they're doing it through GPS or through tags, or tagging them, or how it's, or collars, collars. But they're monitoring the wolves, to see, to understand more of how to get the sheep away from them. Like, let's not let our sheep graze where the wolves are denning, right? That's a common sense solution, right?
Yeah.
And then they also, this farmer also uses guard dogs, and then they have flashing bright lights at nighttime to scare off wolves. And then sometimes they'll string wire with small strips of fabric around the flock at nighttime to basically, help scare them off at nighttime. And then they hire more people to help basically herd the sheep. So we know wolves aren't trying to be up near people, right? So there's some jobs, right? There's some more economy, like give more people jobs. And so, and this is of course just one operation in Idaho, but it seems to be working for them. And so, could that work on a larger scale? Those are things that need to be investigated by, I don't know whether it's by the state or by federal governments or whatever, but I think that there are solutions to try that people just aren't trying because it's, I guess, they just want to, they think it's easier or better to hunt them. But as Chris mentioned, and I mentioned, that the data is not always there. Hunting doesn't necessarily actually help reduce the number of livestock that are taken by, taken. And then it's a slippery slope because of this Endangered Species Act, or basically because people are monitoring the populations. So if you take out a whole bunch of wolves, then they basically get relisted, and then you can't hunt any of them. Mm-hmm. And if you take out just a few, then you're still not getting you're not getting the benefits of reducing the livestock. So that's why, to me, my final answer is just looking at the numbers. I don't think that hunting them is the answer or a good solution. No. I think there's a lot more alternatives to try before that being the catch-all. Oh, there's too many of them, or they're killing livestock, so let's hunt them. I just don't think I don't think the data's there to support that being the best solution for their welfare, as Chris mentioned, since they are such an intelligent and animal with all these pair bonds and things like that.
So let's talk about, and I know Chris is dying over here. I can't believe we're over an hour in. We haven't even mentioned Yellowstone. I can't even.
I know.
Yeah,
I like that. Well,
it's like the whole part of the podcast.
We don't need to mention it. 35 million or more. I haven't checked YouTube lately. Millions and tens of millions of people have watched the video about.
Yep.
We all watched it. I mean, we're nature lovers, so of course we did. Maybe some people didn't watch it. On YouTube, I think it was by BBC, National BBC, about what happened when wolves came back to Yellowstone.
Right, and it's
ecosystem.
And I just want to say, like, people that haven't consistently listened to our podcast, Angie and I are coming. We started this almost, Corbin, we're coming on 2 years now, both of us.
Yep.
And
you've learned a lot about soils and grasses. and how animals are so important for it.
Right. And we've covered over 80 species. We've interviewed close to 40 experts, reaching 50 experts from around the world. We have a global view now of what's going on in our oceans, what's going on on every continent. We've covered from the Arctic to Antarctic, all in between. And it's bad. It's bad. The news is not good, but we try to keep positive about it, give tips on how you can help and how species are surviving. And there's so many people out there, and you've interviewed a ton of them, Corbin, and you're what are you up to 90 episodes now, 80, 90 episodes? Yeah. So you've interviewed a bunch too. And so, you have a really good perspective on what's going on around the earth, and it's not good. So when I look at taking out a top predator and its effects, downstream, not just on that animal alone, you're looking at all the way down, into the microbes of the soil and the birds in the air. It affects everything. And that's why I'm fully against it right now. I do not think we have a sustainable population. I just don't. And I think we need to really study this more before we just start shooting wolves left and right because we don't like them or certain people don't like them. So the best data we have, and I think this data we've talked about for 2 years now, is jaw-dropping the effects of wolves and the ecosystem. And I think that's what we're talking about. So this was a study by Beshta and Ripple. This was the Oregon State one. The other one I talked about was actually Utah State. So this came out in 2016, just a couple years ago, and they were looking at the riparian vegetation recovery in Yellowstone. And basically the history of Yellowstone, once wolves were driven out, 70 years ago, so we're looking at, 1920s, they were driven out until they were reintroduced in 1995 and 1996. The elk populations just boomed, went up, nearing 20,000 elk. Now, they did have a culling in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. They would cull about 5,000 elk a year to try to maintain those populations, but they gave up in the 60s. So from the 1960s to the 1990s, elk boomed to about 20,000 population in Yellowstone, this part of Yellowstone. The effects were the grazing was horrific on vegetation. Changed streams, how rivers ran through Yellowstone completely changed because all of a sudden you didn't have the trees and all the plants to help.
Beavers.
And the beavers went away.
We love
Beavers went away.
Yeah, beavers went away.
And that's just one species. There's many species.
Amphibians.
Insects.
Amphibians.
Reptiles.
Yep.
All of these animals
Birds.
that depended on this ecosystem were affected. But elk were doing great. They were happy. And probably not because they were starving. There wasn't enough to sustain them. When wolves were reintroduced in the 1990s, elk populations started to plummet. And today there's about 5,000 elk. That's about their sustainable level.
Okay.
Now, there was two competing theories on the vegetation recovery. So the bottom line is the vegetation completely recovered. The ecosystem started coming back.
Well, by vegetation, I mean trees, like large
aspen,
willows,
willow. All these trees started coming back.
We obviously need more trees. That is clear.
Yeah.
Yes. So the two competing theories were it was either the top-down approach where it was the wolves causing this, or some people said, no, it's the bottom-up where it was climate change. Well, this study looked at that and said, no, they threw climate change out the window. There's no data to support that climate change was promoting the recovery. It was definitely the wolves that came in, drove the elk away, changed their grazing patterns, reduced their population. So now the willows, the ash, all these tree types are coming back. They're growing. Beavers are returning. And so all these other species are returning because of the wolves. And the bottom line is, in this study, it shows clearly the benefits of having a top predator in an ecosystem. And so this is just Yellowstone. So let's take it to Idaho. Let's take it to California, Washington, Oregon, all of these states in the western United States. These animals are critical to keeping elk in check, deer in check, and keeping a healthy ecosystem. And we are fighting so many battles right now, not just with politics, but with climate change and all the things that are going on around the earth. When these ecosystems start collapsing, it will affect us, period. End of story. David Attenborough was out there. I think that's his swan song. That's the legacy he wants to leave behind with his series that he's doing on Netflix. If the animals don't survive, if these ecosystems don't survive, will humans survive? And I can argue, no, we won't. We won't.
No.
Something will. The cockroaches will survive, right? I don't know. But
they will survive.
Yeah, I know.
What about the people, though, who say, you know what, we were fine without wolves for 70 years, and, what about the people who say, we can manage them, like, we can hunt them, why do we need wolves, like, we can fill that void?
It's when which was fine, right, for 70 years, okay, in Yellowstone.
Well, we think it was fine. We thought, we think it was fine, but clearly from an ecosystem, from a soil up to vegetation or waterway, amphibians, things that aren't super big and massive and easy to see and grab a hold of, all those small things that we weren't really looking.
Notices. Yeah.
There's no pre-data, or there's no control to compare it to, and so that's the thing is we now know what they can add, and the other thing too is like, okay, yeah, we can hunt them, but it's still there's not enough data to know how much. I mean, how do we mimic what a wolf would or wouldn't do? And it's just that to me is that argument has a lot of fault in it.
It does, and because we're not. This isn't tomorrow, okay? And I'm not being alarmist, and it's not my lifetime. You know, the ecosystem isn't going to collapse in my lifetime. The ocean might. We're almost there. I mean, in some parts, the ocean might, but we're talking 2, 3, 4, 500 years down the road. Okay, we're talking many generations later, seeing these massive impacts with extinction. You know, Angie and I, we talk every species we talk about. We say, why do we care? Well, we're talking about the cassowary, plant seed dispersal in northern Queensland. Okay, they were almost wiped out. These trees were going extinct. The dodo, there's trees going extinct on that island. I don't know if you brought it up or somebody brought it up because it was an interview we did. Because the dodo's extinct, now these trees are going extinct because the dodo was critical. Yeah.
God.
So we can't see the effects tomorrow or today. We'll see it in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. So for those folks that say, oh, you know, we're doing just fine. No, we're not. We're not doing just fine. Across the globe, we're doing horribly. And we're losing. We're losing. We are losing. But that's why we're fighting.
Okay,
that's
really,
why we're doing what we do.
Really quick. That's why I actually love your show, because when you do start off, it's like, why do we care? And it took me a while in my young self to understand, like, how important that is. Like, why, like, we have to make it beneficial to us humans. Let's talk really quick, because last I checked, I was talking to Maggie Halligan. She was saying that in Yellowstone, they did. Oh no, I'm sorry. My friend Casey Anderson, who's a naturalist, he has a show on Nat Geo, and he does predators and wolves and grizzly bears. But he said each wolf was estimated to be around, like, for tourism, over $30 million.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I didn't know. I was looking for stats on that. I guess you just got to know somebody.
And he was, no. And he was actually
That's incredible.
And it's his friend, and it's a gal who studied it. And it was just, it blew my mind. Like, okay, like, so why do we care? Well, your favorite saying, or your dad's favorite saying, if it's not about the money, it's about the money. That's a lot of money.
Absolutely. And I think that you could even do more with that. I mean, especially now with technology, or I mean, you could basically have Meerkat Manor, but for a wild pack of wolves.
Yes.
I mean, somebody steal that idea and go make a lot of money. Take it. I don't have time. I'm too busy.
We're too busy volunteering.
You know
our
what
time.
I mean? Like people.
30.
And we're still learning about them, right? As far as their family dynamics and things like that. And so people are fearful of them, but they capture imaginations. And I think the more that we got to know them, the more we'd understand just how intelligent they are. And they are obviously our furry, whether you have a Chihuahua or a Great Dane, like, that's their cousin, man.
Yeah.
And so I think the more we learn about it, maybe more we could see more of that than just them taking livestock or.
And I should actually have Casey send me that study, because his friend who did it, she did it. You were talking about just the effects of tourism and how they, you ask anyone who goes to Yellowstone, they're going to want to see what? Wolf, bear. I mean, think about it. Like, and so it's so
Bison,
essential. Bison, but I mean, elk, deer. But
it's key.
It's a lot of money. They're worth. I hate to look at it like this, but they're worth more alive if you look at it from a monetary standpoint, which sounds disgusting, because I don't like to look like that, but it's
right. No, but that goes to show too, is like, wow. I mean, why would lobbyists be going, against them and trying to get them delisted and things like that? But obviously, there's something, as Chris mentioned earlier, that's worth more money potentially.
Yeah, why would you spend millions of dollars in legal fees, to protect a rancher that loses $1,000 cow? No, you're spending those legal fees because there's something in the ground you want, or things like that. Like, I mined gold with my dad throughout my childhood in Northern California. You can't do that anymore because it's devastating the river ecosystem, and I'm okay with that. It was pretty bad what we did, tearing up the soil looking for gold. So,
oh God, I did that too. Now you're making me. Yeah, but I did it with, like, one of those cheap. Did you do it like how I did
plastic
it with the screen? I never found squat. I mean, I did it for like
gold all the time.
You did.
That was his summer hobby. He was a high school teacher.
Oh, cool.
So,
all right.
But yeah, there's got to be a shift in consciousness. There has to be a shift in behavior. There has to be a shift, not just in the United States, but in Canada, Mexico, down through South America, over to Australia, all the way throughout the world. We have to get along with these animals and we have to protect our wild spaces and what's left. Because, once we lose all that, the earth is never going to be the same. Some things will survive. I don't know if we as humans will survive if we completely wipe it all out. I just don't see it. I don't see it, I don't
well,
see
that's the thing too. I think this is although it's like I said, one of my take home messages was it's very complex and it is somewhat naive for me to think that I can even understand this, 40-year, 50-year history or whatever it is, or obviously even longer. And, in a week time to prep for this, no way. But I have realized that it is very complex and there is a lot of cultural root to it. But there's also a lot of passionate people in the same instance that love wolves and that would, do anything for them. And they're doing great, amazing things that are conservation heroes for wolves and that are the reason why they've been able to get to about 6,000 in the lower 48. And so, yeah, I just think that we need to somehow figure out how to coexist with them as a model for these more of this, not only here in the United States, but in other countries. And we've somehow managed to do it with other species, the bald eagle.
Oh yeah.
And
I was trying to think of one happy success story.
Yeah,
I guess the bison.
They're out there.
I mean, they're out there. They're
Bison,
few and far between, but they're
out
there.
Yeah, the American alligator.
The American alligator. There's a toad in Wyoming I just learned about, which is really cool. But okay, again.
Yeah.
California
condor, peregrine falcon. Okay, raptors. Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, they're out there.
So they're there, and this. I think this has a little bit more complexity to it because it is a predator and all of this. But yeah, I mean, let's I don't know, and I'm not saying that one group should bend to the other or anything like that. But gosh darn it, I feel like if we could, the solutions about how can humans and wolves better coexist? I don't think it's whether you're for or against it, because I think that depolarization that's happening is what's making everything just be stalled out and spending a lot of money. I think it's using science to figure out, okay, well, how do we live with these guys and let their populations grow?
And I don't mean to be alarmist, and I'll just, I know we got to go and sign off, but
no,
I will say every week, and Corbin brings them on his show, we bring them on our show. There are many people around the earth fighting for these animals. Except the Talkin', there's not an organization, or hippos. Those are the two we need. We need organizations for. But there's people out there, and they're conservation heroes, and the listeners to this show, to your show, to our show, they're conservation heroes too. And we all need to become conservation heroes. Even the hunters, and not the ones that are hunting wolves, they need to learn, be educated, and realize, okay, maybe this isn't a good thing, and become conservation heroes.
And I think the other thing too is any of these complex issues, it's like listen to the other person, and that's why I spent a little time trying to put myself in like the DNR or the Fish and Wildlife shoes, or in a hunter's shoes, or in a farmer's, and it's very hard. I really was not successful putting myself in a hunter's shoes that would want to hunt a wolf. So that I need to work on that. I'll do that.
Had one.
I'll do that. I'll do that in therapy.
I actually had one. I had one on my show.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had one. He actually came over. It was my friend's brother came on the show, and we actually had a round table, and we talked after. And
I need to listen to that.
We started out with a shot of Jack. I swear to God. I swear to God, I don't ever drink like before interviews or during interviews, but I was like, Casey, I love, or Caleb was there. I said Caleb, like, cheers, man. Anyway, go ahead.
That's probably a good approach, because I think that it's, That might be let's file that away in the solutions category.
Yes, because alcohol.
Jack Daniels, got it.
Got Jack Daniels, right? Oh my god, that's funny. Okay, really, really quick, you guys. Can we do a bonus segment?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I opened up a little can of worms on my Facebook page and asked people what they thought about the reintroduction of wolves. And,
Okay.
And their thoughts, okay? And I feel like we should just do a couple shout-outs because I really appreciate everybody commenting on my Facebook page. And, by the way, if you are not liking All Creatures Facebook page, please like their page. It's just All Creatures Podcast. Okay, ready? You guys ready for this?
Yep.
Okay. What are your thoughts? Okay, Hannah says, I support with the smiley face. I think wolves are an essential part of the wildlife industry.
Yep.
I like that.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. Anna says, I think they should be reintroduced in their historical habitat. It is healthy for the ecosystems. That being said, it is also important to accompany that with education and better farming practices to avoid conflicts. Was that you that wrote that, Angie?
Okay, I have to tell a secret. No, but whoever wrote that,
Anna.
I love you, man. Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go. Ryan. And I'm happy we have both sides. Ryan says, wolves are destroying the deer and elk population in Idaho. It's not reintroduction either. These wolves have never been in Idaho as they're Canadian wolves. They're far bigger and much more aggressive. Smoke a pack a day and save 1,000 elk.
Okay. I think we debunked that one throughout the podcast, that these are gray wolves, Canis lupus. We're all the way down into Mexico. We know that humans have driven them out of the lower 48, and we've already established too that cougars kill more elk than wolves, and they belong there. And too many elk and too many deer is not healthy for an ecosystem. Period. End of story.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
Go ahead, Angie.
Oh, and a little, I guess, a challenge to Ryan would be if there are if you're feeling like there's less elk or deer when you're out hunting, like that's a better challenge, man. Like, make it more of a fair fight, right?
Now, and I just want to say something with Ryan, because I had on, like I said, that gal from the Wolf Conservation Center, Maggie Howell. I just like saying her last name, Howell. But she was saying, like, I mean, with wolves in size, they're not as big as people think. And she was saying, like, a female will be anywhere from 90 to maybe 100. She said, like, a big wolf will be, like, 130, maybe 140. But, like, these are rare. Like, they're not these gigantic, massive, which is interesting. I found that. I don't know if you guys found any information on that either. Ryan also responded. Someone said, Alicia said to Ryan's comment, what about the elk overpopulating? Or is this not a concern? It's a genuine question. I'm not up to date on any of this. And Ryan came back and said, hunters did a really good job at keeping the populations healthy. Through hunting, the populations grew to a healthy number and were sustained. After the introduction of these Canadian wolves, the numbers are shrinking.
Which is good for the ecosystem. I'm sorry. It's good. Less elk is good for the ecosystem. I don't think they give enough tags to keep the elk population in check. I don't have the data in front of me.
And I don't have the data either. There's an amazing study out of Isle Royale in off the northwestern coast of Michigan in the Great Lake, where it's this bizarre moose and wolf island.
Oh, yes. Lake. Mm-hmm. Yes. Very cool.
Yeah. We don't have time to get into it. Google it. It's I had, of course, in all my ecology classes many, many moons ago, had to study it. And I meant to read up on it before this. But basically, if left alone, they balance each other. Now, granted, this is on an island, and so they can't migrate too much. And there's not other black bear or other big predators or things like that. But I guess what I would want more data, which I think is lacking, is that, if there's less elk, then there's probably going to be, in some years, less wolves because they don't have as much food. Yep. And then the elk numbers are going to go up. And then the wolf numbers are going to go up. And then they'll go back. They do this cyclical thing. And so that's how it was for a millennia before we came around, right?
Millions of years.
Like checks and balances and stuff. Oh, let's see. Someone says, there's just a bunch of stuff. Let's see. I took an elk back in 2012 where my dad and I started hearing howling and barking. They were about a mile away, and they were surrounding us, and they were closing in. I've also heard of hunters taking animals before they even get to the animal. The wolves had already eaten it. I think we just need to send the podcast link to this guy because, wolves do not look at us as a food source. Matter of fact, what are the stats? I think there's only been, one account or fatal something? I think it was in Alaska or something, and a couple in Russia.
I read,
it's very,
it
very
was
rare.
really whatever. Very
Ultra rare.
Very rare.
Like
More,
super
we
rare.
say it. We say it all the time. More
Hit
people
it,
are
hit
killed
it.
by cows. More people are killed by cows each year
And
in the United
deer.
States.
That deer that you're hunting is
kills more
way more likely to kill you.
people. Than sharks, bears, wolves, all the things that we're scared of.
Yeah. Okay. This is my friend Joe, the Batman. He said, "I wish they would reintroduce him to every major city in the U.S." Lol. I agree. He's from New York.
Those poor wolves wouldn't survive very long.
No. Stan says, "I believe they were here first. Only the strong will survive." Amanda says, "Depends on where we reintroduce them." And Tara says they're pro. Anyway, there's tons of comments. I can't get to all of them, but thank you all once again. Even people anti. Thank you for commenting because it's brave to come on an animal. I don't know. Chat room
It is. Well, it is, and that's the thing is we want to. I want to have a pulse on what other people think or what their take on it is, and because how are we going to ever help educate people or things like that if we don't know where the problems Like, I never knew that people thought the Canadian wolves were more aggressive or bigger until I started learning about it. And now I know that that's something that we need to talk about or have more data to support that that's not true. And so that's how you learn, is by actually listening to people and then understanding them. And if we don't keep that dialogue going, then we're all screwed, in my opinion.
True.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. You guys, as always, were amazing. I love our roundtables. And do you have any closing remarks? I know, Angie, you kind of, closed on yours, but any takeaway messages for listeners? And thank you, by the way. If you're an hour and a half in, it's usually longer than our usual episode. So thank you for listening to the show.
Where's that shot of Jack Daniels?
I know. I can't even eat it. That shot of Jack.
No, I just think we need to keep the conversation going. And like I said, we'll revisit trophy hunting as we learn, because, we learn each week. We cover different species. We speak to different experts. We learn as we've been doing this. And I don't mean to be an alarmist. I'm just saying things are not good, and we need to change everywhere around the world. And we are. And there's a lot of positive out there. It's just this topic really got me fired up, obviously. And, I think we just need to keep the conversation going through both sides. Don't shut down. Once you shut down, we're never going to find solutions.
That's great.
Oh, that's my final comment.
You guys are awesome. Until next time, our next roundtable. Thank you so much, Chris and Angie, the All Creatures podcast. Make sure to check it out. If not, make sure to hit subscribe. It's one of my favorite podcasts. And thank you so much for all the shout outs. And we're all making a difference a little bit at a time. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Corbin. So great to talk to you, buddy.
Yep. Cheers.
Cheers and cut. Where's the Jack? I can't.